That's why the process of discovering whether you have a billion-dollar idea or not is not really complex. It's about iterating very quickly. Do you think Uber is solving a real problem, or is it a hype that has been riding for a while? Now let's switch our attention to Twitter. Do you think Twitter is solving also a real problem? If you take a look at the market cap or the valuation of both companies, you will notice that Uber has been always much higher in valuation than Twitter. Now let's switch our attention to two other interesting companies, Google and Boeing. If you think of Boeing, you may say Boeing is advanced civilizations. With the invention of planes and the continuous innovation that they have been pushing, they change our perception about the physical world. They should worth more. But if you take a look at what is going on in the market, Boeing in its best valuation did not worth more than 40% of the value of Google. Now, why is that? This is an important piece for you as an entrepreneur. When you explore a new idea, there are two questions that you have to have in your mind. What defines a great problem? And second, what is the process to know whether the problem that I have right now is a big enough problem that would allow my company and startup to be a multi-billion dollar and thrives for many years to come. So let's dig in. Now, in my last video, I discussed that most of the companies fail. Actually, 99% of startups fail because they're solving problems that no one really cares about. Now, let's zoom in into the 1% that make it. And you're going to notice that most of them are also not going to be a unicorn company. Now, why is that? If you take a look at Google, Boeing, Uber, and Twitter, and the comparison that we just did, you're going to notice two common factors among the companies that are bigger in market size. Number one, they're solving a big enough problem. And second, they're doing it efficiently. And actually, let me break this down into 4 specific factors that define a great problem for any startup to tackle. So let's dig in. The first factor, is it a big enough problem or not? Is it serving a big enough market or not? Again, if we use the example of Google and Boeing, how many would travel every year using airplanes as opposed to how many would search Google every year? That's a huge market for Google. We know that each one of us use Google for multiple times a day. Now, the second is the importance of the problem. How important is the problem, believe it or not? In the modern economy of information and knowledge, finding information and data is way more important than traveling from one point to another. I know that some may argue, even myself, sometimes I would say if airplanes disappeared, I think the civilization would be disrupted more than search engines disappearing from the scene altogether overnight. But in reality, it's way more important for more people. Now, the third factor is the frequency of the problem or the frequency of using the product. How many times would you travel in a given year as opposed to how many times you would use Google in a given day? Obviously, Google is used way more frequently than anyone else. And the last factor, the unit economics. Just think about it. How much does it cost Boeing and the airlines to transfer one person from one point to another, as opposed to how much does it cost Google to serve one search query and display some of the ads in that search query results? All right, let's bring those factors into practical steps that you can use to assess your startup idea and to know whether your startup is going to be among those giants one day. Now, before we dig in, one common problem that a lot of entrepreneurs go through is they keep their market very broad because they believe in their idea and they think they can serve almost the whole world with their idea, and they end up exhausting a lot of resources without really making a certain segment or a set of users happy about their product. And the process overall is all about mapping those 4 factors that I just mentioned into a problem and a product and a commitment from the customer so that your company start going and having that freewheel effect. So the process is relatively simple. It consists of 3 main steps. So the first one is narrowing down to a very specific segment. And the second one is exploring the user's pains and gains that they're after in that segment. And finally, figuring out quickly whether users are willing to commit to your solution or not. So let's dive into each one of them. It's really tempting for a lot of entrepreneurs, as I mentioned, to keep their idea broad enough and applicable to almost everyone to convince their VCs and their employees and partners that they're onto something big. As I said, this is not something that is possible for the early stages of the startup. It's a ground battle. You gain it inch by inch. And given that, you need to narrow down down all your target users into one single segment. And you need to be very specific about that segment. Their demographics, their age, their geography, their income, their problems, their motivations. Try to narrow it down. And the key here, the guideline here is, can you really find at least 10 of that target segment that you can interview? Can you impersonate those and find those within your target segment and interview them in a matter of a week or two maximum or not? And actually, let me give you an example from Google. A lot maybe do not know that. I'm old enough that I've seen this myself. When Google started, they started targeting researchers, and they were indexing research papers and research websites. And actually, they even narrowed it down to computer science and computer engineering researchers. I remember in the early days when I experienced Google myself, I was so fascinated by their ability to bring a lot of research papers in. So when they started to tackle that specific segment, they wanted to understand who are those users specifically? What are their motivations? Why are they doing research? What do they need that research for? And so on. And actually, I'll give you an example. As a researcher myself, when I was looking for any kind of references, it was important for me to take that reference in a certain format, if I'm using LaTeX, for example, and just plug it into my paper. In the search results, actually, they optimized that for that. I could copy that reference and include it in my research paper very quickly. So this is what I mean by narrowing down your segment. And as you see, they took it from one stage to another until they're now broad enough and mighty enough that they're targeting almost the whole world. But it started with that very small segment. You should do the same thing. Now, the next step for you as an entrepreneur to discover whether the problem is big enough for you to tackle or not is to live your customer's life and dig more and more into what they're looking for. What are they trying to achieve with the task that you're trying to help them with? I give you an example. If you're building a fitness app, I wouldn't go and try to ask them about whether they use fitness apps or not. I would take several steps back and start asking them, what is fitness for them? When do they feel that they're not fit? What makes them happy about their health? What aspects of their health that they want to take care of? And so on. That actually may help you to discover much bigger problem than the one that you probably was looking for at the beginning, or might actually help you to build more emotional and more motivational factors within your fitness app that is better than any of your competition. And finally, getting some commitments from your users. And this is important because the only way for you to validate whether your solution is a good fit for that problem that you're solving and whether that problem is a critical problem for them is getting some sort of signals about the importance of that solution in their lives. And that varies greatly according to the market and to the segment that you're targeting. If you're targeting B2B, you might get an early commitment from them to use your product or maybe try it. If you're targeting consumers, they may just register in your mailing list and be anxiously waiting for your product. Or if you have a product for a consumer, you may monitor their usage and see how frequently do they come back to your product. And from that point, you will know whether it actually represents an important part of their lives or not. I'm going to give you an example from Twitch. Twitch, when they started, they wanted to document anyone's lives. You can attach a camera to yourself and just keep recording your day. And they kept ignoring the gamers segment for almost 3 years. And they discovered this from the data, from the usage. They realized that those guys are hooking Twitch to their games, recording those games, and streaming those games to their fans. And they realized this has been done frequently enough that the gamers really loved the tool. This is a sort of commitment. This is, as they say, a strong indicator of a product market fit. You have a product, you have a segment or a set of customers that love your product and use it every day. And we're going to dig into this area actually in future videos. But if you do not have a product, try to get any kind of early commitments from your customers and see how do they respond. If they're okay to give you any sort of their resources, could be time, could be money, to try your product, this is a good signal. Then you should dig deeper and probably build an MVP or a prototype for them. Now, you may say, Mo, is that it? Just 3 steps to know whether my company worth $1 billion? I thought that there is more into it, and there is a secret sauce that you were about to reveal. Yes, that's all. Well, the trick is not in the complexity of the process. The trick is in how many times you try that process. Many entrepreneurs maybe try it once or twice, and out of exhaustion, they stop in the second attempt and they just go with whatever conclusion they got from that specific segment. And that's absolutely wrong. Of course, there are exceptions. Some startups do that process only once or twice and they get the results. But it's not the case for most of the startup companies. And actually, I'm going to give you a very specific and known examples to many. If you're a gamer and you came across Angry Birds, Review Entertainment, that's the maker of this game, had to build 52 games before Angry Birds. They went through 50 plus trials until they got that big hit of the Angry Birds. And they had to crank through these very, very quickly. And that's the key for you as an entrepreneur. You're exploring the possibility of building a repeatable business. Exploring means that you have to turn as many stones as possible in a very short time with the least amount of resources. That's why the process of discovering whether you have $1 billion idea or not is not really complex. It's about iterating very quickly. As I mentioned before, the only resource that you have and the only advantage that you have as an entrepreneur and as an early stage startup is moving faster than anyone else. So stick to that process, repeat it very quickly, and I know that you're going to be sitting on something big very soon.